Every galaxy has its powerful species, dominating the stars with their advanced technology and mighty fleets. Yet, not all races are fortunate. Some are vulnerable, barely capable of interstellar travel, and constantly threatened by aggressive forces. Among these fragile civilizations were the Mazan, a race on the brink of extinction. For weeks, they had been under relentless attack by the Zak Consortium, a ruthless coalition of war-hungry species determined to wipe out the Mazan from existence. Their cries for help echoed across the galaxy, reaching every council and civilization once allied with them. One by one, those allies withdrew. Fleets that had promised to defend the Mazarine now turned away, unwilling to risk their ships and soldiers on a race too weak to defend itself. The Galactic Council, once a beacon of unity, debated. Some argued for mercy, but most agreed the Mazan was a lost cause. Their weak defenses and lack of strategic value made them expendable. But in the shadow of this abandonment, one species stood up, the humans. Against all logic, all reason, they committed their forces to the dying planet of the Nazarene. In a world where agreements were no longer honored, the humans decided to keep theirs. It wasn't because the Mazan had wealth, advanced technology, or even strategic advantage. No, the humans saw something far more valuable, a promise. The planet of Mazan was a dying world. From orbit, it appeared as nothing more than a wasteland of fire and smoke. Its once thriving cities were reduced to flickering lights in the darkness, their defenses crumbling under the relentless Zak onslaught. The Mazan soldiers, brave but woefully under-equipped, struggled to hold the line against the invaders. Every hour brought them closer to total annihilation. And then, from the depths of space, hope arrived. Human ships, marked with the insignia of Earth, appeared in the skies above Mazan. Their engines roared as they cut through the atmosphere, a thunderous sound that filled the air. Drop pods followed, descending like comets, slamming into the ground with the force of meteors. The Zak forces, who had grown complacent in their inevitable victory, were caught off guard. They barely had time to react before the first human soldiers hit the ground, moving with precision and deadly efficiency. Unlike the scattered, desperate resistance of the Mazan, the humans fought as one. Each movement was calculated, and each strike was coordinated. They didn't come to negotiate, nor to defend passively. They came to win. Captain Carlo, a seasoned commander with years of combat experience, led the charge. His boots sank into the ashen soil as he gave the order. Push forward, take back the city. The Mazan could only watch in awe as the humans did in minutes what they had failed to do in weeks, drive the Zak back. As the humans pressed on, the Mazan leaders, trembling and confused, approached Captain Carlo. "Why did you come?" one asked, his alien voice shaking. No one else did. Carlo didn't hesitate. "We had a deal." The simplicity of the response was both baffling and inspiring to the Mazan. In a universe where promises meant nothing, the humans had kept theirs. And now, against impossible odds, they stood between the Mazan and total destruction. The battle for Mazan was far from over. While the humans' arrival had given the Mazarine a glimmer of hope, the Zak was not so easily defeated. These towering, brutal warriors, twice the size of any human, surged forward with renewed ferocity. Plasma fire lit up the sky as Zak's artillery rained down on the battered cities. Their forces, massive and relentless, regrouped quickly, determined to crush the human resistance in one final, devastating assault. But the humans, vastly outnumbered and outgunned, didn't flinch. They had come knowing full well that victory wasn't guaranteed, that this might be their last stand. And yet, that didn't matter. Their mission was clear: to protect the Mazan, to hold the line. Failure was not an option. Captain Carlo and his squad moved through the ruined streets of the Mazan capital, each step heavy with the weight of battle. The ground trembled beneath them as Zak's forces unleashed another wave of attacks. But the humans fought back, not with overwhelming firepower, but with precision. Every strike was calculated, every move a step toward victory. They didn't need the advantage of numbers. They had something far more valuable: determination. The Mazan, huddled behind their broken barricades, watched in disbelief as the humans pushed forward. These warriors, who had no personal stake in the survival of their race, fought with a tenacity that even the Zak could not match. And for the first time, the Mazan leaders began to believe that survival was possible. But the Zak were relentless. They regrouped again, pouring their forces into the industrial sector of the city, a tangled mess of collapsed buildings and twisted metal. It was here that the Zak made their stand, their heavy artillery positioned to cut off any hope of escape for the humans and Mazan alike. Captain Carlo surveyed the battlefield, knowing the odds were stacked against them. "We hit them hard and fast," he ordered, his voice steady. "No second chances. We break their line or we die trying." His soldiers, bruised and battle-worn, nodded without hesitation. They had come too far to turn back now. With a thunderous roar, the humans launched their assault. Rockets screamed through the air, detonating with brutal precision, tearing through the Zak's defensive positions. The Zak, shocked by the sheer ferocity of the human attack, scrambled to respond, but it was too late. Carlo and his men were already upon them, moving like ghosts through the wreckage, cutting down the Zak with speed and precision. The tide of battle had shifted. For the first time, the Zak were on the defensive, their brutal tactics failing against the unyielding resolve of the human soldiers. But as the humans pressed deeper into the industrial sector, they knew the real fight was just beginning. The humans had pushed the Zak back, but victory was still far from certain. The Zak were regrouping, their hulking forms filling the streets like an unstoppable tide. Plasma bolts rained down from the skies, and the ground shook with every step of the advancing enemy. Captain Carlo knew this battle would only get more brutal. Reinforcements were still hours away, and the Zak were preparing for one final, crushing assault. The Mazan, desperate and afraid, huddled together in the ruins of their once proud capital. Their leaders, once resigned to defeat, now looked to the humans with a newfound respect. But even they couldn't understand why the humans stayed. "You can't hold them off alone," one of the Mazan leaders whispered to Carlo, his voice trembling. Carlo's gaze didn't waver. "Watch us." And they did. The Mazan watched as the humans dug in their heels and prepared for the final push. They had no illusions about the odds. They were outnumbered, their resources depleted, their soldiers exhausted. But that didn't stop them. Every human on the battlefield knew what was at stake. If they fell, it wasn't just the Mazan that would be wiped out. Their failure would embolden the Zak to continue their rampage across the galaxy. As the Zak forces surged forward, the humans met them head-on. Plasma fire filled the air, and the streets shook as the two forces clashed. It was a brutal, close-quarters fight, with humans weaving between the towering Zak, using their speed and agility to outmaneuver the larger, slower enemy. But the Zak were relentless, pouring more and more of their soldiers into the fray. Carlo led the charge, his rifle blazing as he cut down one Zak after another. His men fought with a level of coordination and discipline that unnerved even the Zak commanders. Every movement was precise, every attack deliberate. The humans didn't need the advantage of numbers, they had the advantage of resolve. The Zak pushed harder, determined to break through the human line. Plasma fire scorched the ground, and the air was thick with smoke and the deafening roar of battle. But the humans held their ground. Even as the Zak closed in, even as the odds seemed insurmountable, the humans didn't retreat. They fought with a ferocity that took the Zak by surprise. The Mazan, watching from the safety of their bunkers, couldn't believe what they were seeing. Every other species had turned its back on them. Every other ally had abandoned them in their hour of need. But the humans who had no reason to stay, stood firm. As the battle raged on, Captain Carlo's comms officer's voice crackled in his ear. "Captain, evacuation is almost complete. We just need a few more minutes." Carlo's jaw tightened. A few more minutes. That was all they needed. But in a battle like this, a few minutes could feel like a lifetime. The Zak forces were closing in, and the human line was buckling under the pressure. But Carlo knew one thing. They wouldn't break. "Hold the line," Carlo shouted over the din of battle. "We're not giving them an inch." And so, the humans fought on. Plasma fire rained down around them. The ground trembled with every explosion, but they held. One bloody street at a time, they gave the Mazarine the time they needed. Against all odds, they stood their ground. The Zak's final assault came like a tidal wave. Their numbers were overwhelming, their warriors driven by a ruthless determination to crush the human resistance once and for all. From the distance, the hulking forms of the Zak warlords loomed, their roars echoing across the battlefield, a chilling sound that sent tremors through the very ground beneath the soldiers' feet. But the humans didn't waver. Captain Carlo stood at the front of his line, eyes fixed on the approaching storm. His soldiers, battered and bruised from hours of relentless fighting, dug in their heels. They had no illusions about the challenge ahead. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and exhausted, but they weren't finished. Not yet. "Hold the line." Carlo's voice boomed over the chaos, clear and commanding. "We can't give them a single step." The Zak forces barreled forward, their plasma rifles spitting fire as they charged toward the human line. The humans responded in kind, their rifles flashing in the dim light of the burning city. But for every Zak that fell, 2 more took its place. The weight of the enemy's numbers began to press down on the human line, and for the first time, cracks began to show. "We can't hold them off forever," Vance, one of Carlo's men, shouted, his voice strained as he fired off another round into the advancing horde. "We don't need to," Carlo replied, ducking behind cover as a plasma ball whizzed past his head, just long enough. The Mazan evacuation was nearly complete. Their people, once on the brink of extinction, were now being whisked away to safety, thanks to the humans holding the line. The odds were against them, but they had bought the Mazarine precious time that no other species had been willing to give. The humans had done the impossible. But the Zak wasn't finished yet. From the smoke and fire of the battlefield, a monstrous figure emerged, a Zak Warlord towering over the battlefield, his massive energy hammer crackling with deadly power. His roar was deafening, shaking even the bravest of human soldiers. The ground trembled as he charged forward, his eyes locked on Carlo's position. "Steady," Carlo barked, knowing this was the fight that would decide everything. "We hold this line." The Warlord's hammer crashed down with a force that shook the earth, sending human soldiers scrambling to avoid the devastating blows. But the humans didn't retreat. Rockets were launched, aimed directly at the Warlord's massive form. The explosions shook the battlefield, but as the smoke cleared, the Warlord remained standing, barely phased. Carlo gritted his teeth. "Fine," he muttered. "We do this the hard way." With a swift motion, he drew his combat blade and charged toward the Warlord, his men following close behind. Plasma fire and explosions raged around them, but the humans were unshakable in their resolve. They weaved through the chaos, dodging the Warlord's swings as they closed in. Carlo ducked beneath a massive strike, driving his blade into the Warlord's side. The alien roared in pain, but still, it fought on. But the humans didn't stop. One by one, they struck, attacking from all sides, cutting down the Warlord with precision and speed. And then, with one final, deafening roar, the Warlord collapsed, his massive body crashing into the rubble of the ruined city. The Zak forces, seeing their leader fall, began to retreat. The once unstoppable tide of warriors broke, and their morale shattered. The humans had done it. Against all odds, they had turned the tide of battle. As the last of the civilians were evacuated, and the Zak retreated into the distance, Captain Carlo stood among the ruins of the Mazan capital, his body aching from the fight, but his spirit unbroken. His comms officer's voice crackled in his ear. "Captain, the evacuation is complete. We've done it." Carlo nodded, glancing at the burning city behind him. The Mazan would live to see another day, and the humans would leave knowing they had accomplished what no one else had dared to try. They hadn't fought for glory or for riches or even for strategic advantage. They had fought because someone needed them, and that was enough. As the humans boarded their shuttles and left the war-torn planet behind, Captain Carlo couldn't help but feel a deep sense of pride. They had stood where no one else would. They had defended the vulnerable. And in doing so, they had proven that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the universe wasn't technology or firepower. It was honor. As the smoke clears and the battlefield fades into memory, one question lingers. What would you do when the universe turns its back on those most in need? The humans didn't fight for power or riches. They fought because no one else would. But ask yourself, could you have stood in their place? Could you face overwhelming odds, knowing you might not survive, just to keep a promise? And if honor is the most powerful weapon, then what's stopping the rest of us from using it? Stay with us, because this fight isn't over. What will the next challenge be? And who will rise when others fall? Remember, sometimes it's not about winning the battle. It's about standing up for what's right, no matter the cost.